Do you have a guilty pleasure? If so, what is it? It's probably something simple. However, there is a chance that it could be something very harmful. An example of a guilty pleasure that is very harmful is smoking cigarettes. I personally know a lot of people who smoke cigarettes, and a lot of them have to face pretty harsh consequences for doing so. Smoking cigarettes has been proven to be very damaging to your body because it can mess up the way that your organs work. In the end, the satisfaction will never overcome the amount of harm that you will face. A lot of people don't believe that smoking cigarettes is something so serious that they should take into consideration, despite the facts and evidence. So I would like to talk about the statistics surrounding smoking, some studies that have been done showing relating diseases to smoking, and overall realities of it today. And I want to do all of this to encourage you to stay away from smoking cigarettes. So let's get on into it. Now, the statistics surrounding smoking cigarettes is extremely sad because they are very avoidable. According to an article called Health Effects of Smoking Cigarettes from the CDC, deaths relating to smoking cigarettes are the #1 preventable death in the United States. Over 480,000 people every year in the U.S. die from causes relating to smoking cigarettes, and this is nearly 1 out of 5 deaths, which is a huge number. Here is a picture of all the different types of deaths relating to smoking cigarettes every year in the United States. Again, it's very terrible because all of these deaths could be very preventable. Now, if you combined all of the deaths in the United States every year that come from HIV, drug use, alcohol use, vehicular incidents, and firearm incidents, they would still not add up to the amount of deaths every year in the U.S. from smoking cigarettes. And this is crazy because you're taking so many different sections and putting it to one, and it still does not add up. There's a lot of different comparisons we can make here. If you took all the deaths from every war the U.S. has participated in, all the deaths from the United States side, added all those up, and multiplied it by 10, you still would not get the number of people who have ever died in the United States from smoking cigarettes. Now, if these statistics sound crazy, it's because they are. That is such a huge number, yet people still don't want to believe that smoking cigarettes is bad for them. Now, smoking cigarettes increases your chances of getting a bunch of different diseases and different issues. Some of these include coronary heart disease, strokes, lung cancer, cardiovascular disease, COPD, and so many more. When you're smoking, you're damaging your blood vessels, and this can cause clots and cause your vessels to become very thick. Here is an image of a heart, and zoomed in you can see a blood clot, and this is blocking an artery, which is not good. When things get clogged, they will not function correctly, and they can cause harm and death. And nobody wants to feel this harm, and no one should have to. And the reason no one should have to is because it can be very preventable, and you can prevent it by not smoking in the first place. Another thing surrounding smoking is addiction, and according to an article called Smoking by Jack Henningfield at the Encyclopedia Britannica, addiction is something very common among smokers. Now, addiction itself can't hurt you, but it depends what you're addicted to, and being addicted to cigarettes is something that can hurt you. Now, the reason people get so addicted to cigarettes is because of something called nicotine. Now, nicotine gives your brain this effect of feeling good. So the more people smoke, they keep feeling more good. And your brain will keep thinking it's good for them when in reality it's terrible for your body. And this is why you should never smoke to begin with, because once you start, it's something so extremely hard to stop doing. If you ask anybody who smokes, they'll probably tell you how difficult it was for them to stop or how difficult it is for them if they're trying to stop. Here's an image that represents how a lot of people feel about smoking. Once you start, it's hard to get away, and they feel chained to smoking, and it's the only thing that helps them feel better. Now that we've talked about some statistics and addiction, I want to talk about some studies that show diseases relating to smoking. According to an article called Impact of Smoking Cessation on Cardiovascular Events and Mortality Among Older Adults, meta-analysis of individual participant data from prospective cohort studies of the Chances Consortium, written by Ute Mons, there was a study done to see if smoking was related to cardiovascular disease. Now, the way they did this study was they took 3 groups. One group were people who had never smoked before, one group were people who used to smoke but stopped, and the third group were people who were actively smoking. Now, all these people were over the age of 60, and they also tested if having more cigarettes a day affected it, and if having quit a longer time ago affected it as well. Most of these studies averaged from 8 to 13 years, and their results found that the people who had never smoked had the least amount of deaths from cardiovascular disease. People who had previously smoked but quit had the second most, and people who were actively smoking at the time they died had the most deaths of cardiovascular disease. It also showed that people who had quit long before, or had quit for a long time, had less deaths than people who had only quit a short time ago. Here is an image of what cardiovascular disease looks like. Now, just because you don't smoke doesn't mean you won't get these diseases. However, your chances decrease a ton if you do not smoke, and they increase a lot if you do smoke. If you're currently smoking, now would be the time to stop. Majority of us are all very young, so you should stop before you get older, because it'll be much more damaging when you're older and even harder to stop in the future. Now, according to an article called "Cigarette Smoking is Associated with Subclinical Parenchymal Lung Disease, the Multi-Ethnic Study of Atherosclerosis, MESA Lung Study" by David J. Lederer, there was another similar study done to see if smoking was related to parenchymal lung disease. And just like in the last study, they found that they were related. People who had smoked died much more often to this disease than people who had never smoked. And here's an image of parenchymal lung disease. Now, many diseases are found every single day they find that they're relating to smoking. So smoking overall likely increases your chances for almost every disease. So it's better to not smoke at all. Now I want to cover the realities of smoking today. According to an article called "The Effect of School Smoke-Free Policies on Smoking Stigmatization, a European Comparison Study Among Adolescents," written by Pierre Oliver Robert, 38% of smokers that they talked to felt like they were frowned upon, and they felt bad about themselves for smoking. Now, something that smokers face, especially in areas where smoking is becoming denormalized, is discrimination. And some of the ways they face discrimination is they get worse treatment at health services, and they also are not being treated as quickly as they actually could be. Another thing that people who smoke face discrimination from are finding jobs. A lot of people don't want, or a lot of big businesses don't want employees who smoke because it seems unprofessional. Now, a lot of times this isn't a big deal, but it can be, and it is becoming more of a big deal. So it can be harder for those who smoke to actually find jobs. Now, a lot of places in the world are denormalizing smoking, and people keep being viewed worse and worse who smoke as the years go on. A way to prevent all this discrimination is by not smoking in the first place. I'm not saying discrimination is good, but there is a way to avoid it, and that is by not smoking. Overall, smoking isn't something to be taken lightly. It's something that a lot of people suffer from, and it's something that isn't talked about enough, in my opinion. The statistics themselves are sickening because of how many people are dying every year from these things, and the correlation smoking has with so many diseases is another thing that I think people are completely ignoring nowadays. Smoking is a thing that a lot of people know in their heart is bad for them, but they just can't get past the feeling of it, and they do not focus enough on how their health will be affected by it if they do not quit smoking. I hope that after learning all of these new facts that you'll stay away from smoking cigarettes, and maybe you can even help somebody else in the world to overcome their addiction or to persuade them not to smoke. Now think back to your guilty pleasure. I hope that smoking cigarettes never becomes one of those. Thank you for listening.